Starting with news from the Philippines, millions have begun voting for a new president. Polls suggest that son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos is headed to win the high-stakes election. Across the archipelago, with a population of more than 109 million, over 65 million Filipinos are eligible to vote and elect a new president, a new vice president, 12 of the 24 seat Senate and members of the House of Representatives. Also, over 18,000 national and local positions are up for grabs. Filipinos throng primary schools and other polling stations to elect a new president. People wearing masks began forming long queues before dawn to cast their votes when polling stations opened. More than 60,000 security personnel have been deployed to protect polling stations and election workers. There are 10 candidates ruling for the presidential election, including the son of former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos and the incumbent Vice President Leni Robredo. In the Philippines, the winner only has to get more votes than anyone else. Polls showed Marcos Jr. heading for a landslide. He had double-digit lead over Robredo in the latest surveys. While Marcos Jr. had a 75% chance of winning, analysts say that outcome is not guaranteed. If victorious, it will be the return of the Marcos family to power. 36 years after they were toppled in a popular uprising and the family chased into exile. The winner of this election will take office on the 30th of June for a single 6-year term. The new president stands to inherit problems including a pandemic-battered economy, deep poverty, the legacy of brutal anti-drugs crackdown, led by outgoing leader Rodrigo Duterte. For more on this, we're now being joined by Dave Grunbaum, who is a journalist based in Manila. Thank you so much for joining us at this point. To begin with, what is the mood like on ground currently?
There's a lot of excitement here. Right behind me, I don't know how well you can see it, but really about 50 feet behind me here, people are voting. That's where they actually vote. They sit down. It's not a closed-off situation here. They sit down at tables and chairs, and they just, pencil in, or with ink, fill out the whole of who they want to vote for. The presidential race, obviously the most high-profile one. 10 people running in that. A lot of excitement after so much campaigning, but of course, the two top candidates you mentioned, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the late dictator, and of course the leading opposition candidate, Leni Robredo.
Right, absolutely. Now, if we talk about their respective campaigns, do you think they've been effectively able to address all the concerns of the people? Also, what does the fact that Marcos Jr. is leading the polls have to say about voter intentions?
Well, it's really interesting because, as you said, Marcos Jr. has a commanding lead in all pre-election polling. No one else is even close. But here's the thing. He has been running, linking himself to his father. His father, the late dictator, ruled this country for 20 years, from the mid-60s to the mid-80s, with an iron fist, almost half of it under martial law, when thousands of people were tortured, killed, and disappeared. When the family got chased into exile, they were accused of siphoning off from the government billions of dollars. But here's the thing. Marcos, he's been linking himself to his father, but there's no mentioning of the people who were killed. Marcos won't address questions about that. He won't address questions about the money that has been siphoned off all those years by the family. What they've done is they basically try to rewrite the history. There's been an incredible disinformation campaign that really goes back for decades, but has really picked up in the last 6 months to a year on social media, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, where they've tried to portray the Marcos Sr. era. The word term they use is the golden age of the Philippines. They talk about infrastructure projects that were taking place during that time. And here's the thing. The majority of voters in the Philippines are between the ages of 18 and 40. So they were either not alive during the Marcos era, or they were too young at the time to remember it. And these people, they're on social media. So you can get that message to them, and it's been very, very effective for the Marcos campaign. Marcos Jr. has not gotten into any details on his platforms. He's talked about increasing jobs, bringing in foreign investment, getting prices better under control here in this country, but he doesn't explain how he's going to do it. Robredo has gotten into substance, but she has not picked up a significant traction according to pre-election polling. The momentum is clearly with Marcos Jr. if the pre-election polling holds true.
Absolutely. In fact, I was just going to ask you that they have been very vague about what sort of policy changes we will be looking at if Marcos Jr. is to be elected. Like I mentioned, whoever stands to win the presidential election will be inheriting a pandemic-battered economy, deep poverty. Now, is there any clarity on how the contenders plan to deal with such issues?
If it's Marcos Jr., we have literally almost no details of how he's going to do it. Everything has been so vague. He hasn't done any of the debates. He hasn't done any hard interviews. He's only done interviews with favorite media organizations that lob him softball questions. Robredo's gotten into some substance about how she would handle, improving the healthcare in this country, putting more resources into healthcare, into education. Keep in mind her background before politics is she was a human rights lawyer. So those are areas that she has focused on. With Marcos, he's just talked about the big picture. He hasn't gotten into the details. And from campaign strategy, it seems to have worked for him.
All right. Now, also just some more clarity on this. What do you assess are the reasons why Robredo's campaign has failed to gain any sort of traction? Is this just some sort of a change that the people of the Philippines are looking for?
Well, keep in mind, even though she's vice president, she was not close to Duterte, the current president. They run separately. President and vice president, they run completely separately, even though sometimes, as the case with Marcos and Duterte's daughter, Sarah Duterte, they're campaigning together, but you get elected separately. So she's not linked to Duterte at all. This is all about how Ferdinand Marcos Jr., he goes by his childhood nickname, Bongbong Marcos, BBM, how they've portrayed this incredible disinformation campaign, which has been effective, and also the fact that he linked himself with Sarah Duterte, the daughter of the current president. She brings a lot of votes from the South. He brings a lot of votes from the North. So together, they brought that together on a campaign slogan of unity. When you go to their rallies, that's what they talk about, unity, unity, unity. It's not about substance of issues. It's about unity, 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 uniting the country. It seems to be working for them.
All right. Well, thank you so much for bringing us all the updates on this. We will, of course, continue to track this very closely. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.